Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. We are on a Monday, a mock draft Monday, as we are looking at a pair of mock drafts that Dennis and I did, a pair of rookie mock drafts that we conducted over the weekend to see where ADP is in both single quarterback and super flex as we get ready to head into the draft. Dennis, can you believe the draft is on Thursday? You know, you said last week you got to watch draft day for the first time. Last night, my wife, we were going to watch a movie, and she looked at me and she's like, "When is the draft?" And I said, "Thursday." And she's like, "You know what time it is."
Well, I did watch it for the first time and thoroughly enjoyed it. Well, I fully accept that movies often, to be enjoyed properly, you have to suspend a certain amount of belief. And that's what that second trade that Kevin Costner made required. So I enjoyed it. It felt like, you know, a fantasy football trade. Go get your guy, do your thing.
I mean, it's not that hard to believe, given the state of Jacksonville football the last 20 years, that they have a GM that would think that the 106 is worth 3 years of seconds.
Yeah, you know, I've received those trades before and been like, you know, you think somebody's somebody thinks like, oh, I screwed up and let me just keep taking advantage of him, or he's going to be so desperate to just make something up to get something back for that botched trade he just made. He'll accept anything. Yeah, I don't know. It's I thought I enjoyed the movie. You know, I could relate. He had to make some tough decisions. You know, firing your dad is never easy. And as someone who had to fire my son when I owned a restaurant, I could relate to that. It's, you know, I told him going in, I harbored no expectation that he was going to be my successor. However, because of who he was, there were going to be certain unnamed expectations placed on his behavior. And he didn't, you know, he did great for a good while and then just got into this habit of showing up late and whatnot. And I was like, dude, you got to go.
You know, I think they do nail some things. You know, if there was a team that was going to make a catastrophic error and give Kevin Costner all that he needed, it would be the Jacksonville Jaguars. They do spend a fair amount of time talking about how depressing the football scene is in Cleveland. This movie, released in 2014, not much has changed in the 11 years since.
It's evergreen.
And they really dunked on Barry Switzer pretty hard because if you followed football long enough, it is unmistakable that Dennis Leary's character is Barry Switzer, a big-time college coach that inherited a Super Bowl winning franchise, ran it into the ground, and got fired by the Cowboys.
It walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
The only thing better would have been if Barry Switzer got to film it. And, you know, I like other things about it. It's always great to see Chadwick Boseman, an actor we lost too soon. He not only in his cinematic career saved football in Cleveland, but he also saved the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the Black Panther. And Arian Foster, I I started looking last night. I wonder when I forgot Arian Foster never actually got drafted. So I wonder if it was kind of cathartic for him to do draft day and be a first round pick.
Yeah.
So he was a first round pick in many a fantasy draft.
Yeah. That had to feel good for him.
Well, somebody who also will never know what it's like to be a first round pick and maybe on the market is Sam Howell, who, we had some hopes just last offseason when Seattle went to acquire him that maybe he was going to be the quarterback in waiting behind Geno Smith, but they moved on from Geno Smith, gave Sam Darnold a long contract, and then they just brought in somebody else who I'm forgetting. Which
Drew Lock, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right, Drew Lock. That's probably why I blocked it out. All of which now says they're open to trading Sam Howell, the suggestion being he would be probably no better than third on the depth chart. And honestly, in the one appearance we saw him last year, it was grim.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was Ryan Grubb's offense and stuff, or the team in general. But I had high hopes for Sam Howell, and then he didn't get the draft capital. And then he played okay in Washington for a lot. He took a lot of sacks, but he threw a lot of passes and was okay for fantasy. And I thought hopefully he'll get a chance to do something. I feel like after that beating he took in Washington, getting to go somewhere and not play and get developed would be good for him. Unfortunately, he just got to go somewhere and not play. I don't think he really got developed last year. And he seems to be on that, Trey Lance is who comes to mind, but Trey Lance never started as many games as Sam Howell. So it feels like Howell's got a leg up on Trey Lance. Maybe I can't think of a good comparison, but I think maybe Howell is going to be one of those guys that floats around for a couple years, lands somewhere, and is able to just, like, if he could go maybe to San Francisco and be their third stringer for a couple years, maybe he gets a chance to develop some. Who else in the NFL is good at developing quarterbacks?
Yeah, I just don't. They're saying he's available for trade, which makes me think that they don't really plan to just outright release him, because they'd probably be happy having 3 quarterbacks, and that's where who is going to want to trade for him, and what
it feels like a conditional 2026 7th round pick kind of trade.
But what team? So I don't think there are teams out there at this point in time that want to give up a draft pick to have a guy that they have to kick around as a third quarterback and develop. San Francisco signed Mac Jones. He's a quarterback. They're already going to be working on the quarterback rehabilitation process, somebody that Kyle Shanahan was enamored of.
Step in if Brock Purdy's injured, Mac Jones.
And that's somebody that Kyle Shanahan was enamored of before. It would have to. So the ones I could see, like, if the Saints miss a quarterback in the draft and Derek Carr is really too hurt to play, and they're looking at Rattler and Haener, maybe they make a YOLO trade for Sam Howell.
Well, that feels like they got to bring, if that's the case, it feels like they got to bring in a veteran.
But who's out there?
Nobody really, but
yeah.
It feels like they'll have to make a trade for a veteran backup. But I know if Minnesota is a place, go, Kevin O'Connell's a quarterback whisperer.
But you already have, I think Minnesota's in the complete opposite camp. They need somebody experienced and veteran to be behind JJ McCarthy, because they have their own young guy that they're trying to develop and pull along. And that was part of the reason Washington didn't want to keep Howell. They knew they were going to have their own young quarterback they're trying to pull together and move along. Rams, maybe.
Yeah.
If the Rams don't get a development player, well, and we haven't seen anything. I thought that was the benefit for Stetson Bennett going there, but he had the weird not available his first year, doesn't seem like there's been a lot of movement. If the Rams don't get a quarterback they like for development in the draft, do they try to go? And now Sam Howell, this is his last year of his rookie deal, I believe, because he had 2 years in Washington, 1 in Seattle. So it's not like you get him long term. It is potentially low cost. Honestly, he's not a player I think needs to be rostered in Dynasty, even in Superflex, and I don't know what kind of trade market there is.
I don't think there really is, but I think the Rams, if he could go somewhere behind Garoppolo and Stafford, that would be pretty much as good a place as any. Not that I think he could grow into the heir apparent to Stafford, but he could grow into, the heir apparent to Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see where he ends up. Well, as mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at rookie mock drafts. First up, we're going to look at a 1 QB. We did 12 team, 3 rounds. A couple of the people who participated in the draft dropped out after they made their last pick. Maybe it hurts to get notifications. You never can tell. So that's why it looks a little bit like that right in there. But a big thanks to everyone who participated. No surprises. Ashton Janty going 101. I will tell you, overall, what I thought was kind of a surprise. We have a 1 QB, so non-superflex. Only 4 QBs go, 2 of them going in the second, 2 going toward the end of the third. That wasn't that shocking. I don't know about you, but I was mildly surprised in 3 rounds. We only had 3 tight ends go, and I think that feels low. When we look at our Superflex draft, you'll see a lot more than 3 went, but no Elijah Arroyo in this one, no Mason Taylor in this one. Fannin going in the end of the 3rd round. Warren and Loveland, no shock there. But any overall takeaways you had from doing a 1 QB rookie?
So it's funny you mentioned tight end because, 5 minutes after we finished, I was looking at the draft board and I thought, oh man, I probably should have drafted Elijah Arroyo there at 312. I like Raheem Sanders, but he's in the same tier for me as RJ Harvey and Ollie Gordon and Jordan James and LaQuint Allen and Jaden Blue and Woody Marks. So he's not out of the range where he should go, but I do think he would be behind Arroyo and Mason Taylor for me if we had ranked more than 25 players. Yeah. So that was really the first thing that I thought. It went. I had the 12th pick, and so I took Bashal Tutin. And that's really where my rankings, I was kind of following my rankings at that point. And through 2 rounds, I was pretty good at sticking to my rankings. The 3 running backs to start out, that seems very likely. Could Travis Hunter or Tet McMillan move up ahead of 1 or 2 of these guys? They could. It wouldn't surprise me much. I wouldn't be surprised if Warren jumped over Quinshon Judkins. Luther Burton and Caleb Johnson have their champions, and so it could the middle of that first round could shuffle around a little bit. So I felt like it went pretty much according to plan, and then at the end with Milroe and Dart in the 3rd round, if this would have been a 4-round draft, I feel like they may have been pushed down into the 4th round, at least one of them.
So we talked about the first round. We got 7 running backs going off the board. I think as we thought, especially in non-superflex, running backs would be heavy. 4 receivers, probably the 4 that we would expect to be the top 4, McMillan, Hunter, Burton, and Ibuka, and 1 tight end in Tyler Warren. I usually, what I've been doing as an exercise for these mock drafts is I try to seed myself and draft as if I'm drafting for one of my actual teams. So I do have a 1 QB dynasty team where I have the 105, and it is a team where I actually am okay at quarterback and okay at running back. I was hoping to work on receiver and tight end, and I have to be honest, at 5, I was pretty surprised Hunter was still there. I think you are right in that people have such a premium on running backs. It wouldn't be a shock to see Hampton and Henderson go, but in our own rankings, I would say Hunter and McMillan are probably better prospects, and I certainly think Warren has the potential to be a better prospect than Judkins. Some of this, we'll see how the actual draft falls out, but I think the guys that we had in our top 4 in running backs and receivers went. Our top tight end went. Caleb Johnson is a guy that both of us have. Top 5, 6. You like Sampson a lot. He went in the 8 pick, probably not a surprise. And then you were able to grab Tootin. Second round, I thought 201 is pretty good value for Matthew Golden, who both of us kind of have as about that 5th receiver. And then you still see quite a few running backs. Even in that second round, we got one more tight end. I took Loveland at 205. I thought that was decent value for him, especially in a non-superflex league. And with the team that I was looking at, my real life team that I was imagining I was drafting for, I have Fant, Michael Mayer, Tyler Conklin, and Jake Ferguson as my tight ends. So I thought getting a Loveland would probably be a good boon, especially after I had gotten Hunter to kind of bolster my receiving group. A lot of running backs. The first 2 rounds, we saw 7 in the first round. We saw 6 again in the second round, 2 more in the third. That kind of about how you figure it's going to play out through the first 2 rounds. We only saw 7 receivers go. I'm interested to hear you talk about Jalen Royals, because I thought when we did receiver rankings, you had Higgins higher than him and Io Manor, who were still available.
Yeah. So I had Royals and Higgins and Jack Beck, Jalen Noel, Io Manor, and Trey Harris. Had them all in the same tier. So for me, it was like I kind of was looking at, and much like you, I'm drafting for a team that I have that the 112 in, but it's a half point PPR. And so, going Tootin, I could have made a pretty strong case to go Golden over Tootin. But I've got if that's a league where there's such a premium on running backs, and I felt like I was projecting Tootin getting a good market share, and Golden kind of being used, as a second, third receiver, a lid lifter kind of receiver, and being only a half point PPR, I thought, well, I'm going to go Tootin over Golden. Royals, it was one of those cases where in a lot of drafts, I've been taking other guys over him that are in that same tier. And so this time I just decided, well, I'm going to go with Jalen Royals and kind of see how this shakes out. But any one of Higgins or Io Manor, Noel could easily be justified as going over him.
And I do think seeing where some of these players land in the draft might cool. I think Ollie Gordon, RJ Harvey, Trevor Etienne, Giddens. I think they all have, and Scadaboo, Devin Neal, Martinez, they all kind of have their champions now, and people were in that range were kind of grabbing guys they believe in. It'll be interesting to see. I would expect some of these other receivers to slide up. There are still some people that believe in Isaiah Bond too. I think you and I have gone back and forth. Some of the details of the complaint against him emerged, which I will just say are grim. If you're interested, you can easily find it on the internet.
Not flattering.
Yeah, we're pretty grim. You can find the details pretty easily on the internet if you're interested in that. He filed a lawsuit against the accuser, and they made sure to send a letter to all 32 teams that they felt like that, or that was happening, trying to save his draft stock. I told you I not sure that was the greatest PR move, given the graphic details of the allegation that had come out. He is a guy that did not have a great pro day or a great combine. It was kind of sliding anyway. I wouldn't be shocked if he goes undrafted. But there are still some people that think he's, like a top 5 or 6 wide receiver. So, this time of year, right before the draft, it'll be interesting to look back at this probably in 2 weeks and see where some of these prospects landed and how it might change up. In that third round, we did get quite a few more receivers. I was 1 pick away. I thought Jaden Higgins was going to fall to me there, and I was like, this could not work out any better. But I took Alec Eomanor. I thought that was pretty good value at the 305. Restrepo and Jack Beck and Tez Johnson were the 3 receivers that went right after that. Harold Fannin, probably a guy people will take some shots at the end of drafts, but I'm with you. I think Arroyo and Taylor, I actually had Arroyo in my top 25 Superflex prospects. Had I not taken a tight end in the second and I was still looking for one, I probably would have grabbed one of those guys at 305. I just didn't like, it seemed to me the value for where I was at. The team I was imagining I was drafting for was weaker at receiver and tight end, so it didn't matter. But where I was surprised where I was on the board, it felt like receiver and tight end were more of the value where they were falling to me consistently. I don't know how you felt about what came up for you at the turn.
So probably the most interesting one for me is Cam Skattebo, and mostly because I'm not as high on him, but Dynasty Nerds has him at RB5, and what's his name? Not Graham Barfield, the other guy from Fantasy Points. I wish I could remember his name. Has him at RB3, and so there are some people that are super high on Cam Skattebo, and he falls into that David Montgomery mold. And so if he joins the league and becomes, super successful as a 3-down back. But
your Fantasy Points hosts, it says, are John Hanson, Joe Dolan, Tom Broley, Scott Barrett. Okay, there you go.
Has him, I believe Barrett has him at RB3.
I was trying to help you there.
I appreciate it. When you get to a certain age, things don't come as fast as they used to. So I'll be interesting to see it. The way he's picking up speed, and depending on what his draft capital ends up being, we could see Skattebo going, 105, 106, 107, and people not blinking an eye about it.
And this is where I think, we feel pretty confident that Ashton Jeanty is going to be top no matter where he lands. But there are some attractive landing spots, and there are a group of running backs that, depending, whoever lands in Las Vegas, we're going to be interested because Pete Carroll's there. They're going to like to run. Pittsburgh always likes to have, a pretty solid running game. There are some places, Dallas, the Denver Broncos, places where a guy could work himself into a pretty hefty role, especially if you get taken in the, first 3 rounds.
Right. Yeah. The Ollie Gordon is another one that's kind of interesting. 2 years ago, he had a phenomenal year, 1,700 yards. Last year, he had 650. The offense in general was much worse. And he's kind of riding that Chuba Hubbard roller coaster of college production. And then it took Hubbard a couple years after having lower draft capital to get a real opportunity in the NFL. And then the receivers in the third round, the Restrepo, Beck, and Tez Johnson trio, all have it's like Restrepo was like Keenan Allen slow in his 40 at his pro day. And so it's like a 4.83 40. And that's not how he wins. And so when you watch him play, it's like he's getting open. But we saw Hunter Renfrow come into the league, who was faster, but won in the same type of manner and pretty much fade away after a couple years. And Restrepo, where Keenan Allen is 6'2", 205 pounds. Restrepo is like 5'9" and 209. So he's a short, stocky guy. So there's, is it going to translate to the NFL, or is he going to be just too slow at that size? Now, Jack Beck's not a burner by any stretch of the imagination, but he's 6'1". He's got some size. He can play. He looks like he can play the slot at an NFL level. So that was why when we did our wide receiver rankings, for the longest time, I had Restrepo in that 12 slot and Beck at 13, and I swapped them because I just feel much better about Beck. And I really want to be in on Tez Johnson. But man, at 156 pounds, it's just so hard to think he's going to be able to win at the line of scrimmage. He feels like he's so small, he's going to get pushed around. And where Devonta Smith is 6'1", Tez is like 5'10". And so not only is he light, he's short. And we've seen Tank Dell come into the league with a kind of similar measurements. And while he flashes, he can't stay healthy. So I may be looking when we get, like, if Beck is gone, I'm probably looking for a running back, and leaving Restrepo and Johnson on the board here. I'm going to be looking for a running back or tight end or a quarterback at this range.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because we're going to transition here in a second to our Superflex rookie mock. And some of the players that went in this draft didn't even go in that draft, which we did 4 rounds at 12 teams. Like Tez Johnson went undrafted. I think Beck did too. Yeah, neither of those. Oh no, Beck did go. But it's interesting to see how different groups of people are valuing, and I just switched over. Hopefully you can see it now. The Superflex rookie mock, which we did. So we did the single QB on Saturday, and then a nice way to wrap up Easter Sunday dinner. We fired one off about I think it was like 5:30 Eastern, just in time for me to like face plant into the trash, as I mentioned. Which I don't know if that was God's commentary on my draft or not, but it was right in the middle there. Janty goes first again. Amarian Hampton going second again. Even in Superflex here, we're seeing, a lot of people putting a premium on running backs, especially now. And that may not change a lot if those guys both of them have been projected in a lot of mocks to go in the first round of the NFL draft to some pretty good running spots. Cam Ward, we're pretty sure, is going to Tennessee, ends up being the third pick. Not a shock for Superflex that a quarterback would go in the top 3. I think you and I both talked about we would be comfortable taking him later, but kind of depends on how you're doing. Travion Henderson then goes at 4. I was kind of surprised about that. McMillan went at 5. I was picking at 6. What was interesting, I was basing again on one of my actual teams, and this team happens to be the inverse of my 1 QB team. I am pretty strong at receiver and tight end, and definitely need help at running back and quarterback. But when we got to 6, I looked and Travis Hunter was still there. And I just didn't feel like, even though wide receiver wasn't my top need, that was a player I could pass. So I grabbed him right there. I know you were a little bummed to see him go right in front of you. You responded to get Tyler Warren, but do you feel like that's kind of where it's at, especially with the top 3 running backs off the board? It just didn't make sense to me. I'm not taking Shedeur Sanders at 6. Sorry. it just felt like if Hunter's there, that's what I have to go with.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I went with 7 was to see if Hunter would fall to me. I have a team where I'm drafting there. And so I was like, well, let me see if I can get him to fall, because there are people that like Judkins and Johnson and Burden, and Sanders. So will I be able to get, are people going to be so scared off by he's going to play 2 ways, so he's not going to be as productive as a fantasy asset because he's playing a lot of snaps on defense. Daniel Jeremiah was on Sirius XM this morning, and he was talking, Travis Hunter's his number 1 ranked player. He just released his top 150 today. And his argument is like, look, he's not Patrick Surtain when it comes to playing cornerback. Is he a good cornerback? Yeah. Is he a ball hawk? Yeah, he does well, but he's not as good as Patrick Surtain. Is he as good as most of the wide receivers? Yeah, he's an elite wide receiver. So if I'm, the argument that Jeremiah was making was that if I'm drafting him, he's going to be a wide receiver first and a defensive back second. And I think that teams are looking at him that way, and they're trying to say the right things to placate him. There's talk where he said, look, he needs to make sure that Roger Goodell introduces him as a cornerback slash wide receiver. And, his camp is trying to make that happen. But once you're drafted and you sign that contract, the team is going to use you to win games the best way they see fit. And it feels like wide receiver first, defensive back second is the way to go with Travis Hunter. And if I can get that at 106, 107, then I think that's a huge, huge win for fantasy. That being said, with Hunter gone, I was looking at the wide receiver options and the running back options. And I like Emeka Egbuka and Luther Burden and Quinshon Judkins and Caleb Johnson. I like them all just fine. At 107, I'm not going to take them over Tyler Warren. To me, it's like, why take the 4th best running back when I can take the best tight end who, he's not Brock Bowers. He's, a tier below Brock Bowers in what he can do on an NFL team. He should hit the ground running at the NFL level and be productive as an NFL tight end for both his NFL team and fantasy. So for me, it was pretty easy to go Tyler Warren there.
Yeah, and I think we see some players you would expect to see down the back half. Burden, you mentioned Judkins, Caleb Johnson. We thought a lot of running backs. Emeka Egbuka goes 12. Not surprised in Superflex to see a second quarterback go at the back end of the first round at 111. Mildly surprised it was Jackson Dart, though he is seemingly making a run up draft boards in the NFL draft. Going to be curious to see how it goes on Thursday. There are reports today that the Giants are really enamored of him. They obviously hold the number 3 pick. What do you think about, I'm guessing the drafter there believes in Dart, believes in his draft potential, and just decided to make a run there.
Yeah, I like Jackson Dart. I think he's going to need to, go the Jordan Love route and kind of learn how to be an NFL quarterback. He can make the throws. He's pretty athletic, but the offense he ran wasn't really an NFL offense. Shedeur Sanders has his limitations. I know that you're not high on Shedeur, but I think a lot of teams are, maybe feel comfortable with Shedeur's floor versus Jackson Dart's floor. But I think they may think Jackson Dart has a higher ceiling. And then when you throw Jalen Milroe in there, he's the one who needs the most NFL work, but he also has the highest ceiling of Dart, Sanders, and himself. So it's really going to be interesting to look at the draft capital for all three of these players. And, we saw it last year with Michael Penix. He got drafted at 108 by the Falcons. And a lot of people were like, oh, well, there goes his draft stock. Smart drafters were like, yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm taking Michael Penix. I'm okay to let him ride the bench for a year behind Kirk Cousins. And it looks like Penix is set up to be successful now at the NFL level after coming in at the end of the season last year. Will that happen with one of these three quarterbacks, specifically Dart or Sanders? Probably that would benefit the most. Milroe feels like he needs a couple years of NFL coaching to be ready so that he's, not another Anthony Richardson or Justin Fields. It just, he strikes me as being a hard worker from everything I've read about him. And so we'll see what happens. We saw Jalen Hurts come out of Alabama via Oklahoma. And, I had concerns about him being a have to see it before he throws it quarterback. And he's developed just fine as an NFL quarterback. So we'll see if Milroe can develop that same way.
Yeah, into the second round, a lot was made in our draft chat. Shedeur Sanders going at 201. They called it a steal. I don't really find it that surprising. We talked about him being anywhere between 11th and 15th ranked prospect for Superflex. I think top of the first round wouldn't be that shocking to see him go there. Did you think that was a big fall?
Can you repeat that?
Where Sanders went at 201, a lot of people were talking about it being a steal, but that felt like it was in line with both of our kind of Superflex rookie rankings, where he was kind of between the 11th and 15th prospect.
Yeah, I won't be surprised to see it. I just think that there's going to be people willing to draft him at 107, 108. And so, like, if I'm at 108 and Shedeur Sanders is on the board and I'm stacked at running back, I'm hoping somebody wants to come up so they can draft Shedeur Sanders and I can get a 26 first-round pick plus to give that to them. So, it's going to be interesting to see. There are people that like Shedeur and think that he is going to be able to step in, that he's quote unquote pro ready because of the offense he played in. Yes, sacks have been an issue and some of them are on him, but he also played on some teams with really lousy offensive lines. And so they're willing to give him some grace in that department. Threw a good amount of touchdowns, didn't throw many interceptions. So he is pretty good at protecting the ball. It's going to be interesting to see. Draft capital is going to tell a lot.
And then we see Matthew Golden, Colson Loveland, Jalen Milroe go. Not shocking for Superflex. The sixth wide receiver off the board, a little bit of a surprise. Kyle Williams, obviously Dynasty Beard there, a believer, taking him at 205. He didn't even go drafted in our 1QB mock draft. What do you think about that pick there?
I mean, I think wide receiver 6 is probably a little bit high. He's got good size. He's got good speed. He tends to be a guy that drops the ball a little bit, and that's really been what's kept him from being, considered in the upper echelon of the wide receivers. He could come in. I had the same concerns with Xavier Worthy. Not that I expect Williams to be a first-round NFL draft pick, but Worthy had drop issues in college, mostly due to concentration. If Williams can overcome those when he gets to the NFL level, he could be a steal in fantasy drafts. By and large, I would expect Williams to be available in the back half of your third round of most of your draft rookie drafts. And if somebody wants to reach up there and grab him, I think it pushes guys like, Dylan Sampson and Trey Harris and Jaden Higgins, Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor down easier for me to get.
Yeah, and speaking of, the rest of the second round pretty well goes what you would expect. 4 more running backs. Neal and Sampson, you and I took them back to back. That probably reflects. I had Neal higher in my running back rankings. You were more in on Sampson, so that felt like each of us got the guy that we're currently on. Gordon Scadabogo, then Jalen Noel, Trey Harris, and Jaden Higgins to wrap things up. Probably about what you would expect, I would think, through a couple of rounds. You have 4 quarterbacks going in 2 rounds in Superflex, 2 tight ends, and then a lot of mixture of running backs and receivers.
Yeah, I think, the end of the round with Noel, Harris, and Higgins could provide some value. Unfortunately, when you go back and crunch the numbers over the course of, if you go to Dynasty Nerds website and listen to their podcast, they break down the numbers of how frequently a second round draft pick hits. It's not great, Bob.
Yeah, not great. Third round is where we saw a lot of shots on tight ends and that second wave of quarterbacks. When I got to my spot at 306, I had mentioned that this team is a little bit weaker at running back and quarterback, but when I was looking at, I just didn't feel like it was worth pulling the trigger on Howard and Ewers. I liked the value of getting Arroyo there better, so that's why I went that way. Right behind me, you got Will Howard. Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, Dylan Gabriel all end up going in this third round. Do you feel like that's about the right spot to take shots in a Superflex draft?
Yeah, when you get to the third round, I think the hit rate is something like 8%. And so for me, I'm looking to see, I'm probably aiming for pass catching running backs, quarterbacks, and wide receivers just to see, is there going to be somebody, that looks like they have a path to opportunity or the ability to develop down the line. Obviously, I'm in Columbus. I'm a big Ohio State and Will Howard fan. I do have Howard in the same tier as Ewers and Milroe. So, it was interesting for me that Tyler Shough didn't get drafted, but he would, and I thought to myself when that draft finished, I thought, I probably should have went Shough there. And then I went back and looked at my rankings and I was like, oh no, Howard was the right guy for me. I have him a tier above Shough. Now, NFL Draft Capital may swap that around because we're hearing a lot of Shough. A couple people are like, oh, he's a first round talent and, he's going to go in the second round, whatnot. He seems to really have picked up a lot of momentum, good size, good arm. Yeah, he played 14 years of college football and was injured a lot. But, Howard is no spring chicken either. Played 5 years. Howard, I like Howard. I do think, if he seems destined to be, a Brian Hoyer type of backup. But I think Kirk Cousins was kind of expected to be a Brian Hoyer type of backup. And every now and again, one of them comes along and just kicks it up that extra notch. Something just clicks. Maybe that's Howard. Howard has some Ben Roethlisberger traits, doesn't quite have as big an arm, but he's maybe a little more athletic. Big size, 6'4", 235 pounder. So, Quinn Ewers went right after my pick. Ewers was highly celebrated coming out of high school into college. Never seemed to really hit his ceiling in college. So we'll see where he's drafted and what his development is. Harold Fannin was one of those other tight ends you mentioned. And then Damian Martinez at the 311. He's getting a little bit of buzz as a guy that, is maybe a little bit underrated. I've seen him comp to Jordan Howard, but a little better pass catcher. Jordan Howard won me a couple leagues. So if that's the case, by all means, let's go for it, Damian Martinez.
Yeah, you mentioned Tyler Shook. Where I was when I got to the fourth round, I thought about him. I thought about, I've done my YOLO pick before of Kyle McCord. But Xavier Restrepo felt like better potential value at receiver. So I ended up, even though quarterback was for this team, a place I would like to improve, I didn't like how it fell in the draft from that spot. So I never ended up taking any.
Yeah, most of my rookie drafts are 5 rounds. And so it'll be fun to see like who I can convince myself is a value in the 5th round. It feels like Shook is going to get the draft capital that's going to push him ahead of Howard, Ewers, and Dillon Gabriel. I went with Jordan James. Maybe I'm probably being biased because I have him on my only Devy team, and so I want him to be successful. But I mean, he's a small guy that runs like a big guy. He is a good pass catcher. Potentially, he could end up in a Austin Eckler type of role. But he is a good inside runner for being 5'10 and 200, 5'9", 200. So I like Jordan James. Taj Brooks is kind of the same guy, but same way as James, but a little bit bigger. Woody Marks, another big, he made his hay at USC as a pass catching back. LaQuint Allen and Jaden Blue did that as well. So there's a lot of, 4th round, you've got guys taking shots at pass catching running backs. Giddens is a guy that may have 3 down potential. But the wide receivers, Io Manure fell all the way to the 4th round. This draft seems like it's better it's deeper at running back. It's been talked about as being a deep running back class. It just is we're going to have to wait and see where everybody lands and what their path to opportunities are. And, how's the summer go? Do they have a camp that's good enough that maybe causes a Detroit, if Giddens gets drafted by the Lions, is he good enough that they decide they're going to cut Craig Reynolds or Jamar Jefferson because Giddens is going to give him that, and he lands at 3rd spot on the depth chart on a high-powered offense. Next thing you know, Montgomery or Gibbs gets injured, and he's getting some playing time out of nowhere. So we're kind of looking for guys that those types of things can happen.
I think it's interesting you talk about 5 round. I only have one dynasty league that's absent IDP that has 5 rounds, and it's only, I think, because it's a 10-team league. Most of mine, I have a lot that are actually only 3 rounds. So
I don't have any that are 3. Like I have a 16-teamer. Now we also start 9 IDP in that, but that has a 5-round rookie draft.
Yeah, one of my 5 rounds is a 16 team, but it's IDP. Like I think that's why they have it. But I actually have quite a few that only have 3 rounds. I think that just kind of shows you the variability and stuff too. Usually, when you do have those only 3-round drafts, even if it's 12 teams, that leaves 1 or 2 interesting guys you can pick up and stash if you have a taxi squad. So those are always, just like real NFL teams do undrafted free agents. You got to keep an eye out, especially if maybe you don't have much in the way of draft picks. Watch to see who falls, guys that might be worth a deep stash. You never know how it'll turn out.
I have 2 or 3 teams that I'm looking at. All I have are 4th and 5th round draft picks in.
So that's pretty much all you're looking at is deep stashes. Deep stashes. Well, Dennis, the first round of the NFL draft is on Thursday. We're getting close to the hour mark. What do you have any predictions for the first round of the draft?
We talked a little bit of predictions several shows ago, and I felt like it was I felt like 3 running backs were going to go in the first round, and that feels like it's gotten more certain. So I think at that point I said 2.5 would be the over under, but it feels like bumping that up to 3.5. It just feels like there's a little more momentum going.
I'm starting to feel like we're going to have more quarterbacks than at first I thought probably 2 and that's it. Maybe only 1. Now it feels like there genuinely could be 4. With like what you talked about, teams at the top of the second dipping back in if they have a shot at Dart, Sanders, or Milroe. I've seen a lot of mock drafts now that have 4 quarterbacks going in the first round, so we may end up having more of these quarterbacks going than what you expected. I guess I can sort of see, even from a standpoint, if you thought 1 or 2 of those guys would be better off sitting for a year or 2, because if you take them in the first round, you have that 5th-year option. So you can let a guy sit for a couple of years and then still have some time with him playing for you.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you have a quarterback for 7 years if you draft him in the first round. You exercise the 5th-year option. You can franchise him twice. Now it gets expensive there at the end, but if you want to avoid, paying that, 5-year, $300 million contract kind of thing. So
there are a couple of teams I'm really interested about. Dallas, Pittsburgh. I think there's been a lot of, if one of those quarterbacks ends up falling and is available to them at 21, are they going to jump on it? Because the longer we stretch out with no word from Aaron Rodgers, the more, if I was them, I would not want to pin my fates to that, or the 8th-year breakout for Mason Rudolph.
Right. No, I mean, I'll be honest. If I'm the Steelers, I'd rather go with Rudolph this year than Rodgers. I feel like Rodgers is washed. He's a head case. He's not great in the locker room. I mean, he won me a lot of fantasy games, but at some point the skills diminish, and I feel like he's there, and there's, it's easy to, remember the glory days and think you can get him back one more time. And I feel like that's what's happening, is teams are in that spot trying to get those glory days one more time with him. And it's just not there. I mean, it feels like his quarterbacking is like my golf game. I hit like one putt and one drive every round of 9, which is enough to bring me back. But I also have I shoot like a 115. So those other 113 strokes, I completely forget about.
I think the other interesting one for me is going to be watching wide receiver. We're pretty sure Travis Hunter going to go number 2, probably no worse than number 4. I doubt he goes past New England. But who and how many receivers go potentially in the first round behind him? That has been the most fascinating trend watching mock drafts.
3 or 4 is all it feels like.
Hunter, maybe less.
Hunter, McMillan.
And which ones though? Because that's been the fascinating. No 2 mock drafts that you line up have the same approach to where and who receivers might go off the board. So I think that could be a really fascinating thing, and that might be a little bit of what's baked into the mock drafts we had over the weekend, where people were a little slower about jumping on a receiver because we all like Tet McMillan, but what if he doesn't go till the end of the first round and goes to an unfavorable spot? I've seen some mock drafts where he's down late 20s, early 30s, some places where, like JSN. We love JSN coming out, but it wasn't immediately obvious that he'd have a great shot at significant volume his first year, and he didn't, because they had Metcalf and Lockett, and they were still a run-heavy team. Or even our friend Marvin Harrison, who we all thought was the best receiver, and went to a spot where he could be wide receiver 1, but what does that mean when your quarterback's never thrown for 4,000 yards and has nothing but goo eyes for the tight end? Not great things for you, not great things. So I am excited the draft is here. We will be back on Friday talking about round 1 of the draft. I think round 2 will be underway as we're going along. So
should be just getting ready to get started.
They usually start round 2 a little bit earlier, right?
7, I think.
Yeah. So, Dennis, if the people are just counting down the hours, watching the paint dry on their house, waiting for the draft to kick off Thursday night, what can they do to fill their time?
Well, first, before I give our pitch, I want to give a shout out to Scott Fish. Got my Scott Fish Bowl invitation over the weekend. So, not doing a live draft this year. I got a pretty busy summer going on with kid stuff and wife stuff and parent stuff that my wife and I both have going on. So I'm excited to join in another year of fundraising for making kids' Christmases great. That being said, if you enjoy what we do, or if you just want to hate listen, go to your favorite podcast platform, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, hit that subscribe, hit that like button, leave us a rating and a review.
Well, that'll do it for us today. The NFL draft less than 72 hours away, or just about 72 hours away now. So
It's like nerd Christmas.
look forward to that. Until then, you guys have a wonderful rest of your week.